The grand ballroom of the Street Regis Hotel was alive with an electric energy. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting a soft glow over the sea of guests, each dressed in designer suits and lavish gowns. The clink of champagne glasses filled the air as people gathered in small groups, engaged in hushed conversations about stocks, art, and the latest gossip. At the far end of the room, a silent auction table displayed luxury items, vintage watches, limited edition art pieces, and exotic vacation packages. It was a night meant to raise funds for rescue animals, but it also doubled as a status symbol, attracting the elite and those who wanted to be seen alongside them. Among the crowd, Trent Donovan made his entrance. His presence immediately drew attention, not because of his tailored suit or polished appearance, but because of the force of his personality. As the son of a tech mogul, Trent was no stranger to the spotlight. He strode into the room like it was his personal stage, his expensive watch catching the light with each exaggerated gesture. His loud laugh echoed through the space as he made his way past groups of people, tossing out casual remarks about his latest business ventures. "Did I tell you I just sold my app for double what I expected?" He said to no one in particular, making sure his voice was loud enough to be heard by those around him. Several guests smiled nervously, unsure how to respond, but Trent wasn't fazed. He was used to the uneasy glances and forced smiles. After all, when you're as wealthy and powerful as he was, the rules of social decorum often didn't apply. The auction's host, a well-dressed man in his 50s, stood at the front, his voice smooth and practiced as he welcomed the crowd. "Tonight, we gather not just for luxury, but to make a real difference," he began. His words about charity were met with polite applause, but Trent barely listened. He had no intention of participating in any bidding wars or making generous donations. This event was just another playground for him to show off and network with people who could give him more power, more influence. As the auction began, Trent glanced around the room, eyeing the high-profile individuals, imagining the deals he could make and the connections he could strengthen. It was when the auctioneer introduced the next segment, an adoption event for several rescue dogs, that Trent's attention finally peaked. "And now for something truly special," the host said, stepping aside as a small group of rescue dogs, some with tales of hardship and heroism, were brought into the room. The crowd's attention shifted to the dogs, their eyes soft and trusting, ready to be loved and given a second chance. Trent, however, wasn't thinking about the animals. He was already plotting his next move. He noticed one dog in particular, a large, muscular animal with a noble presence. Its calm demeanor contrasted with the chaotic energy of the room. Trent's lips curled into a grin as he made his way toward the dog, an idea forming in his mind. This wasn't just about the animals. This was about making a statement. With a confident stride, Trent moved closer to the dog, eyes glinting with mischief. This would be the perfect moment to get some attention. The murmur of conversations softened as Trent made his way deeper into the room. His every step was calculated, the clicking of his polished shoes echoing off the marble floors. Heads turned as he passed, drawn by his confident air and the undeniable magnetism of someone who had everything and wasn't afraid to flaunt it. He wasn't just any millionaire. He was the millionaire, and everyone knew it. His outfit, an impeccably tailored suit by an Italian designer, was a subtle yet very intentional statement. "Look at me and understand the power I wield." The sharp lines of his jacket made him appear even taller, while the gleam of his platinum cufflinks caught the light in such a way that it practically screamed wealth. His designer watch, more expensive than most people's cars, flashed as he adjusted it, making sure every eye was drawn to him. The champagne flutes were passed around, but Trent, always the center of attention, wasn't waiting for a drink. He reached for one himself, a crystal goblet of bubbly in hand, raising it with a grin. "Here's to being at the top," he said aloud, as though to remind everyone of his status. A few people nearby chuckled awkwardly, though it wasn't clear whether they were laughing with him or at him. He didn't care. It wasn't about them. This night, this event, was his moment to shine. Every laugh, every admiring glance from the crowd was just another validation of the persona he had built over the years. Trent Donovan was the guy who had it all: money, success, connections, and he was going to make sure everyone knew it. The auctioneer, who had been holding a steady but polite pace throughout the event, cleared his throat and continued, but Trent barely registered the words. His eyes flitted from person to person, sizing them up, assessing who could be of use to him, who could open the doors to more lucrative opportunities. He casually strolled toward a small group of well-known investors, dropping names left and right, as if to remind them that his wealth wasn't something to be ignored. "By the way," Trent said, leaning in toward one of the men with a half-smile, "you really should take a look at my latest startup. We're disrupting the entire market." He gave a little wink, confident in the fact that most people would swallow the pitch without question. After all, who wouldn't want to invest in a company run by him? As the crowd continued to mingle and exchange small talk, Trent remained at the center, effortlessly commanding the attention of those around him. But amidst all the chatter, something caught his eye. A handler, walking slowly toward the front of the room, holding a leash attached to a massive, muscular dog. The dog's calm gaze swept over the crowd, its fur sleek and well-maintained. It wasn't just any dog, it was a rescue, but it carried itself with the quiet dignity of a much older and wiser animal. The dog's name was Max, and something about its stillness caught Trent's attention. In a room full of extravagant items and multi-million-dollar deals, Max was the only thing that seemed unaffected by the chaos around him. It was almost too easy. Trent had spotted his next target. He could already imagine how the scene would play out. This dog, so composed, would make the perfect foil for his antics. A few people might be impressed, sure. The dog might even bark or make a fool of itself. Either way, Trent would be the one laughing. And so, with a grin, he started to walk toward Max, ignoring the handler's subtle attempts to guide the dog away from the crowd. Trent's mind was made up. Tonight, he would leave his mark. As Trent neared the area where Max stood, the noise of the auction seemed to fade into the background. The room's usual hum of laughter, clinking glasses, and murmurs of conversation became a distant blur. All that remained was the dog and the way Max stood there, utterly unfazed by the chaotic energy of the event. The handler gently coaxed Max into a seated position, and the dog obeyed with such grace that it felt as though time had slowed down. Max's coat was a rich mix of brown and tan, his muscles lean but powerful, a testament to his time as a service dog. His eyes were steady and wise, as if he had seen the world's worst and best, yet remained unshaken. For a moment, Trent paused. The dog's quiet composure was disarming. It was the kind of presence that commanded respect without asking for it. But Trent's smirk never wavered. He wasn't about to let the dog steal his thunder, not when he had come to this event for one reason: to be the center of attention. The crowd around Max began to take notice, shifting their focus as the dog's handler spoke softly about the dog's past. Max served for years as a service animal, helping his owner navigate the world with ease. Now he's looking for a family to offer him the love and home he truly deserves. The handler's voice was gentle, filled with pride for the dog, who seemed almost regal in the way he carried himself. But Trent's mind was elsewhere. He wasn't thinking about Max's story or the charity. No, he was already formulating his plan. This would be the perfect way to add some excitement to an otherwise boring evening. His eyes glinted with mischief as he surveyed the people around him. There were cameras, a couple of reporters, and more than a few curious onlookers. If he could get the dog to react, even better. The crowd would be talking about him all night, maybe even all week. It was at that moment, in a split second of reckless decision-making, that Trent made up his mind. He would give the dog a little nudge, a small gesture that he assumed would provoke a funny response. A bark, maybe, or a playful jump. Just something to get the room laughing. After all, Wasn't that what he was known for? Being the guy who could always make a scene. With an exaggerated stretch and a slight tilt of his head, Trent approached Max. He could feel the eyes of the room shifting toward him, a few whispers passing through the crowd. Trent didn't care. He was the one they were all watching. His eyes locked onto the dog for a moment. Max's gaze was steady, unblinking. Trent grinned, fully expecting the dog to be startled, maybe even jump at him. But Max didn't flinch. Instead, he remained perfectly still, staring directly into Trent's eyes. That calm, unwavering gaze only made Trent more certain this would be a moment of comedy. "Hey there, big guy," Trent murmured, his voice laced with a tone of mockery. Without missing a beat, he reached out and gave the dog a light tap on the rear. It was supposed to be playful, harmless, nothing more than a little joke. But the room's energy shifted in an instant. The atmosphere, which had been playful and lighthearted just moments before, became charged with an uncomfortable silence. Trent's grin began to fade as he realized that his so-called joke had not gone as planned. All he could hear was the soft sound of Max's deep, steady breathing. And then, silence. The moment Trent's hand made contact with Max's rear, he expected something lighthearted to unfold. A quick reaction, maybe a startled yelp from the dog, or even a bark that would draw laughter from the crowd. It was supposed to be a harmless jest, a little poke to break the tension in the room and get some chuckles. But what happened next was not at all what he had imagined. Max's body stiffened ever so slightly, his muscles tensing as he rose to his full height, a quiet growl rumbling low in his chest. It was subtle, but unmistakable. The air around them shifted, becoming heavy, as though the dog had just decided that the boundaries of decency had been crossed. Trent froze for a moment, his hand still suspended in the air, but the moment stretched far longer than it should have. There was no playful bark, no exaggerated jump. Instead, Max simply stood there, staring directly at Trent, his eyes cool and piercing. Trent's grin faltered. His mind raced for an explanation, but before he could fully process the situation, the silence in the room became suffocating. The other guests, who had been laughing and mingling moments before, suddenly grew still. The clink of glasses, the murmur of voices, everything faded away. All eyes turned to Max, and then back to Trent, as though they were all waiting for something, anything, to break the tension. But nothing happened. Then, without warning, Max let out a deep, guttural bark that sent a jolt through the crowd. It wasn't loud or frantic, but the power behind it was unmistakable. The sound of it resonated in the pit of Trent's stomach, as though the dog's response was both an insult and a warning wrapped into one. Trent's confidence, so effortlessly bold just moments before, began to crack. His heart skipped a beat as the reality of the situation set in. This wasn't funny. It wasn't even amusing. It was serious. The dog wasn't playing along. Trent took a small step back, instinctively raising his hands, unsure of what to do next. And then, just as quickly as the bark had come, the dog's gaze intensified. Max was not the scared, playful animal Trent had expected. Instead, Max was still, grounded, his unwavering eyes locked on Trent's, as though reading his every thought. The crowd, once filled with whispers of excitement, began to murmur in hushed tones. Trent could hear a few gasps, a couple of uncomfortable coughs, and the shuffling of shoes as people shuffled their feet. He could feel the weight of their judgment, the collective realization that something had just gone horribly wrong. The perfect joke he had envisioned was falling apart in front of his eyes. Trent's stomach sank as he realized the full scope of the situation. It wasn't just the dog that had responded. It was the crowd, too. He could already sense the shift in the room. People weren't amused by his antics. They were appalled. He had crossed a line, and in doing so, he had made Max, the calm and noble rescue dog, the unlikely hero of the evening. Max didn't bark again, but the silent power in his stare was enough. Trent, once the brash and untouchable millionaire, suddenly felt small, exposed. The air around him had thickened, and despite the soft clink of champagne glasses and the murmurs of the guests, it felt as though time had stopped. Trent tried to smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. He glanced around the room, hoping for something to salvage his pride. But all he saw were disappointed faces, people who now seemed embarrassed for him. He quickly turned away, but not before he stumbled back, his heel catching on the edge of a nearby chair. The sound of falling glass echoed through the room. It wasn't just the champagne tower that he'd knocked over. It was the last of his carefully constructed image, crashing down in front of everyone. The room was now filled with a heavy silence, thick enough to cut through. Max, who had only moments ago been a quiet, dignified figure, was now the unintentional center of attention. His deep bark had echoed throughout the room, and Trent stood there, stunned. His hand was still extended, the mockery he had intended to direct at Max now hanging awkwardly in the air. But it was the look in Max's eyes that made everything feel different. Max wasn't afraid. He wasn't flinching or running away. Instead, he was watching Trent, almost as if waiting for him to understand something. Trent could feel the tension crawling up his spine. His earlier bravado was gone, replaced by a sense of humiliation that he couldn't shake. The faces around him, people he'd once charmed with ease, now looked at him with judgment and pity. His jaw tightened as he tried to regain his composure, but the dog's unwavering stare held him captive. Max wasn't just a dog now. He had become a symbol, a quiet force that had overpowered Trent's self-assuredness with nothing more than a look and a single bark. Max's handler, a woman in her 30s with short, dark hair, stepped forward, clearly trying to diffuse the tension. She placed a hand on Max's leash, gently guiding him to sit, but the dog didn't look away from Trent. He remained still, his body taut with an almost regal patience. The handler looked up at Trent, an expression of concern flickering across her face, but there was no visible anger in her demeanor. She wasn't rushing to scold him, and she wasn't trying to make excuses for the dog's behavior. She was simply there, standing by Max, whose calmness in this moment spoke volumes. Trent shifted uncomfortably, glancing around at the room full of people now watching him. His previous confident swagger had completely evaporated, replaced by a creeping sense of dread. He tried to recover, to laugh off the situation, but the words wouldn't come. The damage had already been done. It wasn't just the dog's response that had left him feeling unsettled. It was the weight of the room's disapproval. Trent had always been the one who controlled the narrative, who knew how to command attention with his charm or money. But now, for the first time in a long while, he felt completely out of control. As Max sat patiently, still watching him with those intelligent eyes, Trent's mind raced. This wasn't supposed to happen. This wasn't how the night was supposed to go. The dog was supposed to react with some comedic yelp, maybe jump playfully at him, and the crowd would laugh. They would all laugh at how clever he was. But instead, Max had turned the tables. It was as though the dog had rated him, dissected his every move, and decided that he wasn't going to be the punchline of Trent's joke. Suddenly, Trent felt the weight of the situation hit him. He had made a mockery of something that deserved respect. Max, the dog who had given years of service, who had worked selflessly to help his owner navigate the world. And in an instant, Trent had belittled him. As if sensing the shift in Trent's demeanor, Max's handler spoke, her voice calm but firm. Max has been trained to serve. He's not a prop for people's amusement, she said, her gaze never leaving Trent's face. There was no anger in her words, just a quiet confidence. He's earned his respect. Trent swallowed hard, the words landing with the impact of 1,000 realizations. For a fleeting second, he wanted to apologize, to do something to make it right. But the room was watching, and it wasn't the time for redemption. It was too late. The phone cameras had already been raised. A few hushed whispers of, "Did you see that?" and "What was he thinking?" rippled through the crowd, and Trent could feel the weight of the eyes on him. The room, which had once felt like his stage, now seemed like a trap. He could feel his heart rate pick up as the murmurs around him grew louder. His confidence was slipping through his fingers, faster than he could grab onto it. Max, on the other hand, remained calm and unmoving, like the silent victor of a game he hadn't even known he was playing. It was then that Trent realized he had underestimated both the dog and the room. The savage response wasn't the bark itself, it was everything that followed. And in that moment, it wasn't just Max who had the power. It was everyone who had witnessed it. Trent had lost. The minutes after Max's reaction felt like an eternity. Trent stood there, his shoulders stiff, trying to maintain a semblance of composure. But inside, a storm was raging. The laughter that had once been his weapon, his means of controlling any situation, had turned into uncomfortable silence. He could feel the stares, the judgment in the eyes of the people around him. The room, which had once been his kingdom, now felt like an arena, and he was the one being scrutinized, the one on trial. Max remained seated, unbothered by the growing tension. His eyes still held that unwavering gaze, the calm and quiet confidence of an animal who knew exactly who he was. His handler stood beside him, her arms crossed, watching Trent with a calm but unyielding gaze. There was no anger in her eyes, just a quiet assertion that Max deserved better than to be the subject of someone else's cheap amusement. Trent's mind raced, but there was nothing he could do to reverse the damage. His attempt at humor had backfired spectacularly. The audience had seen it all. The sudden shift in the room's energy was palpable. The once bustling atmosphere had gone still, and the murmurs of conversation were replaced with quiet whispers and subtle glances. People shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure whether they should speak up or just let the moment pass. Trent looked around desperately, his eyes landing on the various faces that had been admiring him just a few moments ago. A few of them looked at him with pity, some with disbelief, and others with outright disdain. It wasn't just that he had disrespected Max. He had miscalculated the mood of the room. What he thought would be a lighthearted joke had instead been seen as an insult, a slap in the face to the dog who had done nothing to deserve it. The handler finally spoke again, her voice calm but firm. "Max doesn't deserve to be the butt of your joke," she said, her words cutting through the tension like a knife. She glanced briefly at the crowd, as if inviting them to share in her unspoken disappointment. "He's not here to entertain. He's here to find a family who understands the value of what he's done." Trent felt his face flush. He opened his mouth, ready to speak, to apologize, but the words caught in his throat. How could he fix this? A casual apology wouldn't be enough. The cameras were already on him, some even filming the whole exchange. His reputation, so carefully crafted over the years, was crumbling before his eyes. What had started as a simple, ill-thought-out joke had now escalated into a full-blown social disaster. I didn't mean it like that," Trent stammered, but his voice sounded weak, even to his own ears. The apology felt hollow, as though he were trying to salvage something that was already beyond repair. He had never been the kind of person to back down, to admit he was wrong. But right now, he was standing in front of a room full of people who had seen him make a fool of himself, and no amount of charm or money could undo that. Max's handler didn't respond. She didn't need to. The look in her eyes said it all. She didn't need to hear a shallow apology from someone like Trent. Instead, she turned away, gently guiding Max towards the edge of the room, where a few other dogs were being led around. Max walked calmly beside her, his head held high, as though he had won not just this battle, but any battle that might come his way. Trent stood there, feeling smaller than he had ever felt in his life. His usual sense of invincibility, the thing that had always shielded him from the consequences of his actions, had evaporated. He could feel the stares burning into the back of his neck. The whispers grew louder. "Did you see that? What was he thinking?" That wasn't funny. Trent wanted to leave. He wanted to disappear from the room and forget that this entire night had ever happened. But he couldn't. He was stuck, frozen in place, a glaring example of someone who had let their arrogance get the best of them. The crowd's eyes were no longer filled with admiration or envy. Instead, there was a quiet, simmering disappointment. They had all been entertained by his larger-than-life persona, but now he was just a man who had gone too far. A few minutes later, he saw a couple of familiar faces slip away from the crowd, their expressions avoiding his as they made their way to the exit. It was a quiet exit, one he had hoped would never happen, but the room's atmosphere was now thick with discomfort. Trent's empire of charm and wit had crumbled, and in its place was the unshakable presence of Max, the dog who had just become the hero of the evening. As the minutes stretched on, Trent felt like he was sinking deeper into the quicksand of his own making. The auction had continued without him at its center, though the damage had already been done. The whispers in the room had shifted from casual chatter to outright gossip, and no matter how much Trent tried to convince himself that it would blow over, he knew deep down that this moment would haunt him for a long time. The laughter he had expected never came. The crowd didn't rally around him as he had hoped. Instead, they seemed more interested in avoiding him than acknowledging his presence. Some of the people who had once seemed eager to engage with him now gave him sidelong glances, too polite to say anything directly but clearly uncomfortable with what had just unfolded. The damage to his reputation wasn't something a smile or a charm-filled pitch could undo. He lingered near the edge of the room, trying to gather his thoughts, but the weight of what had just happened was too much. The memory of Max's unwavering gaze, the deep bark that had silenced the room, played over and over in his mind. He had been outwitted, outclassed by a dog, a rescue animal who, despite his calm demeanor, had managed to humiliate Trent in front of everyone. It was almost laughable, but not in the way Trent had imagined. He couldn't remember the last time he had felt so exposed. Trent's assistant, Marissa, came up to him after what felt like hours of silence. Her face was sympathetic, but she didn't sugarcoat the situation. "Trent, maybe it's best if we call it a night. People are talking. This could get worse if it drags on." The words stung, but they were true. There was no saving face here. He had made his bed, and now he would have to lie in it. The reality of the situation began to sink in. He had been so certain that his wealth and charm could shield him from any consequence, but now he realized how quickly everything could unravel. A single misstep, a poorly timed joke, and it was all gone. He wasn't just losing the crowd, he was losing his sense of self. I know," Trent muttered, his voice low. "I didn't mean for it to go this way. I didn't think he'd." He stopped himself. What was the point of finishing that sentence? There was no excuse for what had happened. Marissa gave him a long look, the kind of look that spoke volumes without needing to say a word. "I'll take care of the press. Don't worry about it. Let's just get you out of here before it gets any worse." Trent nodded, feeling the weight of her words. The press, the cameras, the reporters who had been lingering near the back of the room had no doubt already caught footage of the awkward exchange between him and Max. The internet was ruthless, and Trent was already dreading the headlines that would follow. "Millionaire makes a fool of himself at charity auction. Cocky billionaire learns the hard way not to mess with rescue dog." The clickbait would write itself. As he started to walk toward the exit with Marissa, he caught one last glimpse of Max. The dog, now back at the far side of the room, was calmly lying down next to his handler. There was something about Max's stillness that struck Trent harder than anything else. The dog wasn't angry, he wasn't showing off, but there was an undeniable power in his silence. Max had won this battle without even trying, and that was the part Trent couldn't shake. He, the man who prided himself on his ability to control any situation, had been humbled by a dog. Outside, the cool night air hit Trent like a slap to the face, but it didn't help clear his mind. Marissa ushered him into the waiting car, and as the door closed behind him, the reality of what had just happened sank in. His phone buzzed, and for a brief moment, he thought it might be something important, a call from an investor, or maybe a potential business deal. But when he checked the screen, it was a notification from social media. Trent Donovan strikes rescue dog for laughs. Watch the shocking moment. He felt his stomach turn. It was happening already. The story had spread, and he was at the center of it all. No amount of wealth or connections could protect him now. He wasn't the rich, untouchable man people admired anymore. He was the millionaire who made a mockery of a rescue dog, and everyone knew it. The next few days felt like a blur for Trent. The fallout from his actions at the charity auction came faster than he had anticipated. News outlets, both local and national, picked up the story, and social media was alive with viral clips of the moment Max had turned on him. Memes flooded Twitter. Videos on Instagram and TikTok showed the moment Trent had tapped the dog on the rear, followed by Max's sharp bark and the awkward tension that followed. The comments section was relentless, with people from all walks of life offering their opinions, many of them scathing. "You don't mess with a dog like that," one user tweeted. Trent Donovan just learned the hard way. Another video on TikTok, which was captioned, "When the dog has more respect than the millionaire," had garnered millions of views. People weren't just criticizing him for his actions, they were mocking him too. Trent, who had spent years building his empire and perfecting his image, had been reduced to an object of ridicule. Despite his attempts to salvage his reputation, things only seemed to spiral. He posted an apology video, trying to play it off as a misunderstanding, explaining that he never meant to harm the dog and that it was supposed to be a playful joke. But the damage had already been done. His attempt at damage control was met with skepticism. People saw through the hollow sincerity in his voice, and the video was widely criticized for being tone-deaf and insincere. His PR team worked overtime, issuing multiple apologies, sending out statements, and trying to clean up the mess. But it was clear, Trent wasn't just fighting for his image, he was fighting for his identity. The carefully curated persona of a charming, untouchable millionaire was shattered. People now saw him as someone who lacked awareness, respect, and most importantly, humility. In the quiet of his penthouse, Trent tried to reflect on the events. His usual arrogance had failed him. For the first time, he couldn't throw money at a problem or use his influence to brush it away. No amount of wealth could save him now. He had to confront something deeper, something he had avoided for years, his own vulnerability. But as the days passed, the weight of the incident seemed to lift just a little. Some people were starting to talk about his sincerity in trying to apologize. The media buzzed with discussions about celebrity redemption and public figures learning from their mistakes. The fact that Trent had been so visibly humbled made people begin to soften their stance. Then, a glimmer of an opportunity appeared. Trent received a phone call from the handler of Max, the dog from the auction. She offered him a chance to meet again, this time under different circumstances. She explained that Max had been trained to help people, not just to protect or serve, but to teach lessons in patience, respect, and compassion. Trent was taken aback by the call. This wasn't what he expected, an invitation for redemption, rather than condemnation. The handler told him that she wanted to give him a chance to prove he had learned something from the incident. It wasn't about excuses. It wasn't about saving face. It was about taking responsibility for his actions, about showing that he understood why the moment with Max had struck such a chord with people. She didn't want Trent to simply apologize for the joke. She wanted him to show he had grown from it. Trent, for the first time in a long while, considered the offer carefully. It wasn't about his reputation anymore. It wasn't about trying to claw back his social standing. It was about something deeper, his respect for himself, for the people who had lost faith in him, and for the dog who had shown him a lesson he would never forget. Max had been the one to humble him, and maybe it was Max who could help him find a way back to himself. Trent took a deep breath and dialed the number back. "Let's meet," he said. "I'm ready."